Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion never dies. This episode is Between Two Worlds, a slice of UK and China life. I'm recording this in my hotel room in Chengdu. I'm here for one academic semester, and I just had a quick visit to Shenzhen. I shared about that on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/British Culture. Thank you everyone who saw that and who commented or messaged me. And it was from that trip that I met an old friend there who kind of gave me the inspiration for this episode. He was telling me how hard he found it to describe his life in China to people back home in the USA. And when he did so, he felt it wasn't landing for some reason. He found a bit of a separation between the two worlds, his life in China, his life in the USA. And I've had that from plenty of expats in China. If people live here for a few years, they start to feel a real disconnect between China, the UK, China, the USA, or wherever. And yeah, I sometimes found the same. Maybe I go back, I tell a story, and the reply is, oh, moving on. Or maybe I describe something and people say, it's the same here. And it's really not. But how to explain it? There must be a good way. My pet theory, by the way, and I do love pet theories, is that most people need a hook, something they can relate to, identify with, put themselves into the story. So I thought, why not the usual? Why not some local news stories? Maybe compare some local news stories of Bingley to Shenzhen, which I'm familiar with, and Chengdu, which I'm getting more familiar with. These two cities are quite far apart, by the way. Anyway, Bond up north, Sam has told me that he really likes these episodes where I go through local news stories. He likes to listen to them as he drives to work. He's told me that he can't take it back now. I'm recording this episode. So, some local news stories. But first, just to give it a bit of a context, day-to-day life, the important stuff, right? The really, really important stuff. The stuff of getting a nice coffee and a gluten-free blueberry muffin, right? I need gluten-free stuff, and in Bingley, relatively straightforward. I'll just head out to a coffee shop, possibly get a gluten-free cake there. If there's one, I'm happy. If there's two, okay, nice. I have some kind of choice. Too many, and I'm just not used to choosing, to be honest. I can remember going into a bakery in San Diego where everything was gluten-free, and to be honest, being quite overwhelmed. Normally I just have, if there's a gluten-free cake, then I'll have one. Keeps things in check. Anyway, here, not quite so simple. Gluten-free really isn't a thing in China, although most Chinese cuisine is, especially in the south, already gluten-free, right? It will be rice, and yes, potatoes are part of Chinese cuisine as well these days. And coffee, yeah, fairly straightforward to get now in most big Chinese cities. There's one bakery in Beijing, Michael's German Bakery, that does gluten-free bread and a few cakes and muffins. I order from them on Taobao, which is kind of like the Chinese version of eBay. That's where I got my Daniel Gaster copy jacket, which I talked about in a previous episode. So Michael's German Bakery, they bake it and they send it by courier to Chengdu, 1,118 miles away, or 1,800 kilometers, depending which currency you use. A 20-plus hour drive either way. Taobao I found relatively straightforward, but having lived in China, then I've always had kind of either residence addresses or, whichever visa permit allows me to put the numbers in and get it, or I've had Chinese bank accounts. So I've been set up quite happily on Taobao and quite happily browsing it. Colleagues from the UK who are just visiting for a few months, I think have been struggling with it. So here I have the advantage, just go on Taobao, order from the German bakery, get sent to me, I get my muffin. As for coffee, well, obviously I could just make it with the instant sachets in the hotel. I'm very grateful they're there. Having travelled, I'm not sure which adjective to use here, extensively in the south of China. I'm not sure if I can use the word extensively. How much do you need to travel before you can say you've travelled extensively? Obviously I lived in China, but I was working. Same as anybody in the UK doesn't necessarily travel extensively in the UK when they live in the UK. Or wherever. I wasn't constantly on the move, but I travelled for work and I travelled for pleasure, and I've been to more places than most in the south of China. Plenty of small places, including tourist locations and tourist hotels. do not have coffee, because the overwhelming majority of tourists in China are Chinese, going from one province to another, so a lot of Chinese people just don't drink coffee. Anyway, it is fairly common in Chengdu, where I'm living now, and I didn't want the hotel coffee, so I potted out to a nice coffee shop that's kind of a little way down the road. And you know what? I had the literal, today I'm really happy, I had the literal textbook conversation. I was able to say hello in Chinese, they say hello back, I say I'd like an Americano, they just check an Americano, yes, hot or cold, hot, any sugar, no, here or take away, I wanted to come back here and drink the coffee whilst I was looking for these local news articles. Every single bit of that, thanks to them, was very much the scripted conversation that you might read in a language learning book, so feeling a bit of a high from that. My Chinese isn't too bad. It is bad considering how long I've lived here, but it isn't too bad. But I was really, really pleased to have the textbook conversation. Obviously, it can sometimes diverge into, hey, your Chinese is really good, where are you from? And other things which I might not be fully braced for. Obviously, if these are a word I don't know, I'm not too worried about it. I don't know. If it's a word I half know and it's somewhere in the back of my mind and desperately trying to recall it, or I suddenly think what the perfect response would be like 10 minutes later, that's a little bit more frustrating. But anyway, those are the little things I'm dealing with as I'm just trying to get coffee and a gluten-free blueberry muffin. Not the end of the world, and I did get both things I wanted, but you know, it's just a bit of a difference when you're trying to get what you want. I would add, if I was desperately trying to get a hyper-specific Chinese thing in the UK, it would also be a bit of a faff. Anyway, that's just my life in China, so how about broadening it out to some news stories, UK and China, and I'll alternate between the two. The first thing, just to run on my regular rabbit holes, I'm gonna misquote Goldfinger here from the movie. Man has climbed Mount Everest, gone to the bottom of the ocean. He's fired rockets at the moon, split the atom, achieved miracles in every field of human endeavour, except should Bingley in West Yorkshire have a McDonald's. I've talked about this quite a few times recently. The last few weeks we've had the headline, planning permission granted on appeal for McDonald's restaurant and drive-through in Bingley. Oh yes, a planning inspector has allowed a Section 78 appeal on the 24th of March 2026 by McDonald's Restaurants Limited. Now, I'm sure you're as invested in Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990 as amended as I am. An applicant for planning permission can make an appeal to us if their planning application was refused by the local planning authority, the LPA, their planning application was granted subject to conditions which the applicant objects to, or the LPA failed to determine the planning application within their deadline for doing so. This is known as non-determination, just talked about more in section 4.3 of the LPA's deadlines, etc., etc., etc. There's a few other conditions under which somebody can appeal under section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 as amended. I believe it was the first one that McDonald's Restaurants Limited was objecting to, and finally they were granted that permission for a restaurant, drive-through facility and car parking at the former Bingley police station site in West Yorkshire. This is mainly due to the city council selling off certain assets which they could no longer maintain. They did have public consultation in which they asked the general public of Bingley, what would you like to be built on the former Bingley police station site? Overwhelmingly the answer was a police station. A few people did suggest maybe a youth centre of some kind. Unfortunately, there simply wasn't the finance available. Now, the local planning authority, the City of Bradford Metropolitan Council, had refused planning permission in September 2025, but of course on appeal it went to the inspector, who found that there were no highway safety concerns which justified refusing planning permission. So it is on a significant junction, there's a main road close by. A few people had complained that this junction gets busy enough at certain hours. However, the inspector found that it wouldn't materially harm the wider highway network. He also concluded that the proposed vehicle parking provision accorded with the development plan, and that the removal of on-street public parking spaces would accord with the policy requirement to encourage a shift towards sustainable travel modes. buses, I guess. Additionally, the inspector concluded that there was no basis to refuse the appeal on health grounds. That was something talked about at the Metropolitan Council meetings, one of them saying, hang on, McDonald's meals are no more unhealthy than many of the cakes at Betty's, and there probably wouldn't be the huge objection if we built a Betty's instead. I think I talked about that in my last Slice of Life episode, and I probably added if it was a Betty's that was going to be built there, I mean, I'd be first in line. I'd be delighted. However, it will be a McDonald's. The inspector said there would be an increase in expenditure locally. I know at the town council level that was heavily debated, because the argument is people be on the main road, basically pull into Bingley, go to the McDonald's and drive out. It won't bring any business locally, but it's thought maybe there would if they parked and walked up, possibly. And there is a use of previously developed site and the general charitable work undertaken by McDonald's. That's been talked about before. They've got kind of an army of litter pickers and various other things. So ultimately all the different factors weighed in favour of granting planning permission, according to the inspector. And that's the current situation. McDonald's can go ahead and build their Mackies. Okay, I've talked about that before. I've now talked about it again. How about some news from China? Now, I shared on YouTube my experience of being in a self-driving Didi, like an Uber. I've also shared their video footage of my drone-delivered coffee. Shenzhen really is the tech capital of China, and I shared this story with some of my kind of former students. I worked in adult education out here, so my former students are fascinated by the story of a robot traffic policeman. So I've got an article here from the Xinhua News Agency, or New China News Agency. It's the official state news agency of the People's Republic of China, a ministry-level institution of the State Council. It's the country's largest media outlet. If you go onto it, today, I'm recording the day before release. Today the headlines were things like China explores new path to common prosperity, and authorities across China unite to forge bonds with wild neighbours. That is, animals. So it tends to have a certain voice for all the news articles. Anyway, the news article I'm talking about, the robot traffic policeman, starts like this. In Bantian, in Longgang district, a robot adorned with Shenzhen traffic police insignia has been officially on duty since March 6th, managing the morning rush hour at road intersection. Upgraded from its previous role as a roadside safety propagandist, this robot traffic commander now stands firmly on a platform in the centre of the intersection. I love the way they phrase these things. Unlike traditional fixed posts, the robot uses high-precision joint modules to perform standard traffic gestures, such as signalling straight movement, turns and stops in real-time synchronization with traffic lights. Its visual AI recognition system allows it to watch the intersection intently. When it detects violations, like an e-bike rider without a helmet or a vehicle stopping beyond a line, it immediately issues a warning whistle and makes a corrective hand gesture, creating an identify, warn, persuade closed-loop management system. Again, I've asked a variety of friends, including my former students, about this. They were fascinated by the idea of what happens if a robot car ignores a robot policeman. Whose programmer goes in court against whose programmer? If a robot car prioritises the safety of the rider, will that be at the expense of a pedestrian or a scooter rider? Who's responsible for insurance, especially for these robot taxis? The operator, the programmer, the customer, and my favourite question, how many dreams of electric sheep will there be? Yes, a Blade Runner reference in this economy. So, Shenzhen robot traffic policeman. That's the news story from Shenzhen. And then just today, the story breaking, I got this from the TechCrunch website. Robots beat human records at the Beijing Half Marathon. The winning runner at a Beijing Half Marathon for humanoid robots finished the race today in 50 minutes and 26 seconds, significantly faster than the human world record of 57 minutes, currently set by Jacob Kiplimo. Kiplimo? I'm not sure how to say that. Comparing human and robot running times may seem unfair. One social media user observed, "My car can outrun a cheetah too." Still, The winning time is a massive improvement over last year's race when the fastest robot finished in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Back then, the writer Anthony Ha scoffed that this would not be an impressive time for a human. The Associated Press reports that this year's winner was built by Chinese smartphone maker Honor, which, by the way, is Shenzhen based. That's why I was zoning in on this story. It seems the winning robot wasn't actually the fastest, as a different Honor robot finished in 48 minutes and 19 seconds, but one was remote controlled. The 50-minute, 26-second robot was autonomous and won due to weighted scoring. About 40% of participating robots competed autonomously, while the remaining 60% were remote-controlled, according to Beijing's E-Town Tech Hub. Not all of them did as well as Honor's robots, with one robot falling at the starting line and another hitting a barrier. Actually, I saw those videos initially, before the news story broke, that this actually beat a human. Of course, the rise of robotics has been generating headlines for quite some time. I recall in 2022 there was that chess robot in Russia which broke a child's finger who took too long. The robot broke the child's finger, Sergei Lazarev, Moscow Chess Federation president, told TASS news agency. This is, of course, bad. Yes, indeed. The machine had played many previous matches without incident, hardly breaking any fingers at all. The boy was able to finish the final days of the tournament in a cast, TASS reports. There we go. A robot breaking a child's finger who was taking too long to play chess. I suspect many humans had long considered this strategy, but simply hadn't dared to try. Anyway, the march of robotics continues here in China. Meanwhile, let's go back to Bingley. Let's go back to Bingley for a very different news story. A therapy dog helps ICU patient speak again. A therapy dog has been credited with helping a woman speak again after she survived a cardiac arrest and 40 minutes without a pulse. Kathy Hackney from Bingley, yes indeed, collapsed on a cruise ship on New Year's Eve whilst travelling to Madeira. She spent 2 weeks unresponsive in intensive care, where her husband Peter Hackney was warned his wife might not recover or could face significant brain damage. After being taken to Bradford Royal Infirmary by air ambulance, the family said regular visits from a Shih Tzu named Ella helped change things for the better while Kathy was in the ICU. Ella is part of Pets as Therapy, PAT charity programme, and visits the hospital every Thursday alongside her owner, Kieran McCrill. Things very quickly changed, very positively, once Kathy arrived at BRI, Peter said. When Ella first visited Kathy in ICU, I had already left after visiting her, but a close family member was there. Although I had heard Kathy communicate and talk earlier in the week, this was the family member's first visit to BRI, and they had not heard her speak. As soon as Kieran, the dog's owner, put Ella on the bed, Kathy sat up and said, "Isn't she beautiful?" Tears ensured, as these were the first words that the family member had heard Kathy speak since before we departed on our cruise. He added that his wife had perked up no end during Ella's weekly visits. Kieran, who's part of the volunteering team, noticed an instant bond as soon as he placed Ella on Kathy's knee. I love this story, first of all, for the little detail that a visit from a dog, not her dog, but a dog, was more powerful, seemingly, than a visit from her husband and another family member. Also, that these weren't actually her first words, they just happened to be the first words heard by an unnamed relative who was just visiting at this time. Anyway, it has been a very emotional but rewarding experience for both Ella and me to see and be part of Kathy's journey. It's just an incredible story, he said, the dog's owner. While Kathy is still having problems with short-term memory, she has been well enough to return home after spending 2 months recovering from her cardiac arrest at Bradford Royal Infirmary. The couple hope to see the New Year's Eve fireworks in Madeira in the future, and Kathy is looking forward to painting, walking, playing the ukulele, and seeing her cat. I love how a cat has done absolutely nothing in this story. A strange dog has given her voice back, but her own cat has done nothing. I don't know if the cat is in maybe a second home in Madeira, or if the cat is local and just hasn't bothered to visit. Anyway, that story amused me. That was another fun story, but it's West Yorkshire, so therefore it has to be a news story about the Bronte sisters, those writers who wrote so many great classic books that I read a long time ago and have half forgotten. Anyway, a lost manuscript which has been hidden for more than a century has uncovered a teenage Charlotte Bronte's fascination with a, quote, very naughty, end quote, Parisian society. The Journal of a Frenchman was the missing part of a series of a young men's magazine which Bronte edited and wrote aged 14. It belongs to the Bronte Parsonage Museum and has been analysed for the first time by the University of Chester's Professor Deborah Wynne, who said she was honoured to be chosen. On reading the magazine, Wynne said she discovered aspects to Charlotte Bronte she hadn't really uncovered before. It's written as though Charlotte herself is a French young man who's a dandy. He gets drunk and disorderly. This was the time of dandyism. This was as much in the news, I suspect, then as robots, traffic policemen are in the news today. Of course, it is the era of Beau Brummel, who made an impact around this time, leading dandyism, which still shapes many menswear conventions today. I saw a fascinating exhibition on this, and also how the term dandyism has evolved over the last almost 200 years. But I saw an exhibition on this in Manchester a few years ago, and actually Beau, B-E-A-U, Brummel, is my recommended rabbit hole for this episode. Yes, I think it's been a while since I had a recommended rabbit hole. Beau Brummel, I think, should be it. Anyway, Professor Deborah Wynne. So you've got this Yorkshire clergyman's daughter who seems so respectable, but she seems to know all about being drunk and disorderly in Paris in this journal entry. And you realise she had this sense of humour which doesn't always come out in quite the same raucous way in her novels. Not the professor's comment, my comment. No kidding. I mean, they're pretty grim novels. Anyway, Professor Deborah continues, she's more ladylike in the way she writes her novels, where she gave herself this freedom to write as a man and rarely went to town with that, she said. In 2019, the magazine was discovered and purchased by the Bronte Parsonage Museum in Haworth, where the sisters lived and wrote their novels, such as Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. The museum had all other issues of the Young Men's magazine and bought the September 1830 issue when it appeared in a Parisian auction house. The museum set up a fundraising campaign which Wynne donated to and returned to Haworth, where it has now been examined and preserved. 6 scholars were invited to analyse the work, the results of which were published in the Journal of the Bronte Society last year. Wynne said discovering the manuscript was fitting together this piece into a jigsaw. It was an amazing experience to see that manuscript and know that it had been hidden away for over a century. To know I was the first person to actually push all of that jigsaw together, as it were, was really exciting, so it's been one of the best projects I've ever worked on. She said themes in the manuscript reappear in Bronte's later, more well-known works, such as Jane Eyre. She really presents the aristocratic characters in France negatively, and later in her novels a lot of the aristocratic characters are presented negatively too, she said. So you can sort of see how she's already developing her disapproval of her Frenchman, and in the end he loses all his money and becomes a tavern keeper, and says he's much happier drawing pints for people who come into his tavern. And yes, I have been up to Haworth, and I've seen the tavern, the inn, the pub, where supposedly their brother, the Bronte's brother, used to go in and drink, and supposedly at midnight you can still see his ghost running to the pub to try and get one last pint. Anyway, there's this sense that France is a very sort of naughty place. It's this place where things go on that don't happen in Yorkshire parsonages. Measuring just 3 centimetres by 6 centimetres, the magazine is part of a series of works the Bronte children wrote off scraps of paper because of the high cost of paper in this era. Principal curator at the Bronte parsonage claimed that the little manuscripts were meant to look like printed books and magazines produced at the time. He said they've got these title pages, contents pages, all kinds of stories, reviews, poetry that you'd expect to find in a more regular magazine. Some of them even have advertisements in the back. So these were the first publications by the Brontes, really. She said the children would have created them using quill pens. It was the kind of writing they developed for this little book became sort of a secret code among the siblings, because they must have realised that if their father or their aunt came across any of these tiny manuscripts, they would not have been able to read them. So they're written in a kind of code. Now, the curator says this is probably quite a good thing, because some of the content is not the kind of thing you'd expect from a minister's children. my own comment is, this is exactly the kind of thing I'd expect from a vicar's child, and probably the exact kind of thing the vicar expects from a vicar's child, which is probably why it is in code specifically, to try and hide what the adults suspect. Anyway, let's flip back to China. I'm currently in Chengdu, and I asked the students in a class recently, so these are first year engineering students, I'm teaching them English for engineering. I was just asking them, what are the top 3 things that Chengdu is famous for? And I wasn't expecting the answer they gave me. So I'm expecting pandas. I've been to see the pandas. I'm expecting spicy hot pot, which is the local top cuisine, and yes, I have tried it. And then I was expecting mahjong, which, yes, I've played mahjong. Those were the top 3 that I was expecting. This is the mahjong city. And what they said is kind of pandas, hot pot, and gays. And I did kind of a double take at this, and they were like, yeah, Chengdu is really, really famous for gay people. So it seems this is the Brighton or the San Francisco of China. I was quite curious about this. I think I did mention, again, in my previous kind of update on Chengdu, that I've seen a lot of people in Lolita dress, mostly girls, but I have seen, I'm pretty sure, a couple of boys dressed in the Lolita outfits. So I had a quick look at Wikipedia as they mentioned the gays. So sorry, Henry Cavill, if you haven't seen it, there's a famous red carpet interview where someone cites Wikipedia as a source, and he says, Wikipedia, and he ticks. So sorry, Henry Cavill, I have to say, I think Wikipedia is a great place to start when you know nothing. It shouldn't be the place where you end, and it's not what you should cite in academic essays, but actually I think for an overview of a topic, often it's pretty good. And obviously then you can check all the sources and more serious sources. Anyway, Wikipedia talks about Chengdu gays. Local culture also plays a significant role in the formation of gay public space. The local custom of drinking tea in Chengdu and the relatively free atmosphere of the tea houses allow LGBT people to be able to live together in the public space and have their characters be openly expressed. Now, I had this with some of the more eccentric fashions, like I said, the Lolita fashion, which I haven't generally seen around China. I found that interesting, and a friend who lives here was telling me, well, it's because people are just more tolerant and more accepting here, so it fits in with that little that I knew. As I say, you don't want to finish with Wikipedia, so I did find an interesting academic source by Wei Wei. She's an academic in the Chinese Journal of Sociology. There's an article on the emergence and change of homosexual identities in local Chengdu. I really wanted it that narrow. It is a bit of an older article, 2007, but the abstract really sums up, what, as an abstract should, sums up the whole article. Changes in the economy and society of contemporary China have contributed to the coming out of homosexual identities and formation of homosexual communities. Based on a field study in Chengdu and from a constructionist perspective, this paper identifies 3 identities among homosexual men in the local context: the emergence and change of the wandering, Piaopiao, comrades, Tongzi, and gay. Although these 3 identity terms are being used interchangeably by the male homosexuals in Chengdu, they imply different cultural references and political connotations. The author argues that the Piaopiao identity serves as a crucial linkage between the traditional and modern homosexual identities, whereas the Tongzi identity facilitates the shift in homosexual expression from behaviour to identity in contemporary China, thus helping the formation of the development of homosexual communities. That's from the Chinese Journal of Sociology, 2007. It's a long time ago now, but it is interesting. Yeah, it really has been talked about for this length of time, and never came across that, never knew that. Chengdu is the Brighton of China. So, I guess one more story from from Shenzhen. I can't remember whether I've told this on the podcast before. If I've met you in person, I may well have done this. A friend of mine needed to take his girlfriend to a hospital, just a regular checkup, as often you have your general practitioner in a hospital, but he needed to take his girlfriend there. And they walked into the hospital, and they saw one of the more worrying sights that you might see in a hospital. I won't keep you in suspense. The very, very worrying sight they saw, the size of maybe a 2-story house, was a gigantic photograph of me as a doctor. The reason for this is because a few years ago there was a new hospital opening in Shenzhen. It was a partnership between an Australian hospital and the Chinese hospital, and that's one of the key points. It's a private hospital, so the Australian hospital in Shenzhen really needed to emphasise in its general advertising the Australian aspect. They couldn't find an Australian. It wasn't time for the Australian doctors to fly in yet. Obviously you need to do the advertising before the grand opening, and so through a friend, I was recruited to be a model, and I got to film a whole bunch of adverts. I didn't do any accents. The video section was dubbed. I checked this in advance. It would be dubbed in Chinese. Obviously it's for a Chinese audience. So I went along. I spent much of a day filming and being photographed. And partway through it, I mean, they were saying, just talk about medical stuff. So I'm getting into character, but in inverted commas. Anyway, I'm talking medical stuff, and then I look at the Chinese doctors, the guys in the white coats and so on. I'm like, so in real life, I'm a director of studies for an adult education centre. What do you guys do? And they said, we're doctors. I'm like, yeah. In the adverts, you're playing doctors, but what do you do in real life? And they're like, we are the doctors at this hospital. They had actually hired the Chinese doctors, first, to make sure everything is fine, to get working practices set up, but before the patients arrive, they're all there. So I suddenly realised I was talking absolute nonsense medically. It's a whole bunch of serious medical doctors. I just changed the topic. I talked about something else completely. But I had a fantastic day out being filmed for this. I didn't see much evidence. In fact, I think I became friends with one of the doctors, and he sent me, I think, all the pictures I have from the day of filming and photography I got from there. And then later on, I saw the adverts. So I have to say, it is to my friend's credit, he walked in, saw me, and did not walk straight out. He trusted the hospital, and it was, in fact, a good hospital. So I think I'll wrap up there. The extraordinary opportunities. Some opportunities are amazing. As you travel around the world, you see an opportunity, you try it. Never say no to adventure. I think an author I quite like once said that. That's my slice of life in UK and China, between two worlds. Slightly different, but in some ways much the same. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you very much. Message me on albionneverdies@gmail.com or Instagram FlemingNeverDies, or whatever's convenient to you, and let me know what you'd enjoy next. Thank you very much. Goodbye.